In Chapter 3, we're going to be going over logic. So in this section, it's going to be statements and logical connectives. So the study of logic is very important. It enables us to communicate effectively, and it also develops patterns of reasoning for decision making. So we're going to be essentially relating words to symbolic logic here. So before we do this, we have to go over a lot of terminology. So the first one is connectives. So a connective is going to be the words and, or, and if, then. And we use these obviously every day to connect thoughts. And in logic, we're going to be calling these, like I mentioned, connectives. So the word and is going to be used to indicate that both events take place. So remember when we were doing with the Venn diagrams, the word and represents the intersection between sets. And next, for the word or, there's actually two types of ors. There's the exclusive or and the inclusive or. So the exclusive or is going to be one or the other of the events can take place, but both cannot take place. The inclusive or is going to be one or the other or both events can take place. So we're going to be using the inclusive or for this section. And if you remember, this was the word that told us it was the union of sets. Okay, and then lastly, we have the if-then statements. If-then statements are going to be used to relate two ideas. So a sentence that can be judged either true or false is called a statement, and labeling a statement true or false is called assigning a truth value to that statement. So for example, we have these three statements. The first one is the Brooklyn Bridge goes over the San Francisco Bay. So we know this is a false statement because it does not go over the San Francisco Bay. So that's the truth value to that statement. The next one is Disney World is in Idaho. This is also false. Disney World is in Florida. It is not in Idaho. And the last one is the Mississippi River is the longest river in the US. This one is true. So these are all examples of simple statements, and a simple statement is a statement that conveys just one idea. And we're going to be doing compound statements in a little bit. A compound statement is going to be a statement that combines two or more ideas. Okay, for the next thing, we're going to be going over how to negate statements and quantifiers. So starting with negation, sometimes it's going to be necessary to change a statement to the opposite meaning, and to do so, we use the negation of a statement. So for example, if we want to write the negation for the statement, Emily is at home, the negation is simply Emily is not at home. So the negation of a true statement is going to give us a false statement, and the negation of a false statement will give us a true statement. So negating a statement essentially flips the truth value of it. So that example hopefully wasn't too difficult, but they do get a little bit harder, and they get a little bit harder when we are negating statements that contain quantifiers. So quantifiers are going to be words such as all, none, or no, they mean the same thing, and some. So these are three words that we consider quantifiers. So for example, if we want to determine the negation for the statement, all lakes have fresh water, we may think the negation of this is simply no lakes have fresh water. This, however, is incorrect. This is not the negation for this statement, and we kind of know this is the negation because we know that a lot of lakes do have fresh water. So it is not as easy when there is a quantifier such as the word all in here to negate the statement. The actual negation of the statement for all would be some do not. So the negation of the statement all lakes have fresh water is actually some lakes do not contain fresh water. There's a couple other ways to write this also, so let me just write those down. We can also have the phrase, not all lakes contain fresh water. That is also correct. Or we can have at least one lake does not contain fresh water. So the first one that we wrote down is going to be the one that we primarily are going to be using for the negation of all here. Okay, so here is a little description of the negation of these quantifiers. So suppose we have the form of the statement that says all are, just like we did. We were saying all lakes have fresh water. And we said that the negation for all is going to be some are not. Okay, and then if we have the form of the statement none are, the negation is going to be some are. So obviously the confusion here is that all and none are not negations. And once you know those two, you essentially know all of it, because the other ones are just the same thing in reverse. If you have the form of the statement that some are, that means none are for the negation, and some are not would be negated to all are. Okay, you can use this little diagram to help right here, where on the left we have the phrases all are and some are. On the right we have none are and some are not. The negations are going to be these little diagonals. So the negation of some are is none are, and the negation of all are is some are not, and vice versa. Okay, let's do a couple examples here. So let's write the negation of each statement. The first one is some books are novels. So we have the quantifier some. So we don't want to accidentally say something that would be incorrect, so we can look at this little table for now before we have this memorized. So some books are novels. That means the negation is going to be none are. So the negation is going to be no books are novels. And remember that none and no are essentially the same thing. So no books are novels is the negation of that statement. Okay, in the next one we have all coins have the image of George Washington. So this time we have all. So the negation of all is going to be some are not. So we can phrase this properly by saying that some coins do not have the image of George Washington. Okay, and then the last one here we have no bikes have 3 wheels. So we have the quantifier of no, which is equivalent of none. So if you go up here and look at what would the negation of none, that would be some are. So that means we can write this as some bikes have 3 wheels. Okay, so negating it comes down to, in this case, remembering the negation of the quantifier. So for the next thing, we have compound statements. So statements consisting of 2 or more simple statements are called compound statements. So the connectives we're using, we mentioned them earlier. The connectives we're going to be using to join 2 simple statements are going to be and, or, if, then, and then there's also this other one, if and only if. Okay, so we also have to remember this one little piece of information here. If a simple statement has been negated, we consider that to be a compound statement. Okay, and we're going to be using a lot of symbols here, so it's going to be very common to represent the simple statement with a lowercase letter, and the most commonly used ones are going to be P, R, and Q. Okay, so let's start with not statements. So the negation of a statement is going to be symbolized with this symbol, the little tilde or tilde, and is going to be read as not. Okay, so that's going to be the symbol for negation. So let's do an example. Suppose P represents the statement, Steve is a college student. Let's write the negation in words and in symbol form. So the negation here of Steve is a college student is going to be Steve is not a college student. And in symbols, if P represents the statement that he is a college student, that means the statement, or the symbol, the negation symbol, and P is going to represent that he is not a college student. So what you have to do is you put it in front, directly in front of the letter representing negation. Okay, so for this other example right down here, if we have a statement, suppose we have a statement that says Inga is not at home, that statement is a negation because we have the word not in there. So to write this as to write this symbolically, we're actually going to let P represent the statement that Inga is at home. That way, using this notation with a little tilde, P, that represents the statement Inga is not at home. So even if we're given the statement that seems like it's going to be just P or Q or R, if it's already a negation, then we have to think about what it would be before we negated it, and then put the correct symbols to the symbolic representation. So the next thing is going to be AND statements. So AND statements are going to be called conjunctions. So this conjunction is going to be symbolized with this symbol. So it's easy to remember because it looks like an A missing the horizontal bar, A standing for AND. So the conjunction AND is going to be symbolized with that symbol, and it's going to be read as AND. And then we also have to keep in mind that it can be read as but, however, and nevertheless. These are all in symbolic form, and they're synonyms for AND. Okay, so let's do an example here. So let P and Q represent the simple statements. So we have statement P, which is you will perform 5 months of community service, and statement Q, which is you will pay a $100 fine. So the conjunction of these statements is going to be as follows here. We have the statements joined together with the word and. You will perform 5 months of community service, and you will pay a fine. So symbolically speaking, this is going to be the symbols for this one is going to be P. The and is going to be the conjunction symbol, and you will pay a fine was statement Q. Okay, so that's how you would write this one. Obviously, you would write them a little bit closer together so they're not so far apart, but that's how you would write P and Q here. Okay, let's do another example. So write the following conjunction in symbolic form. So the musician is not on tour, but she is recording a new CD. So first we see the word but. That's going to be another form of and, so we know it's a conjunction. So we need to let our statements be represented by some sort of letter here. So we also have the word not. We have a negation here. So when we are writing the statement symbolically, we're gonna not have the negation here. So instead of the musician is not on tour, we're gonna let statement P be the musician is on tour. So we should never have a negation be one of our statements from the beginning. And for the other one, for statement Q, is going to be she is recording a CD. She is recording a new CD. Okay, so when we are combining these to form the conjunction here, what we have to do is remember that the first statement is actually negated. So it's going to be the negation symbol, P. So this means the musician is not on tour. And then we see the word but, and that is the conjunction. So we use the symbol for a conjunction. But she is recording a new CD, which is statement Q. Okay, so this is the, let me move it over a little bit. Okay, this is the symbolic form of that statement. Okay, so for the next thing we have or statements. So or statements are called disjunctions, and they're going to be symbolized with the upside down of the conjunction one, which looks like a V, and we're going to read this as or. So for example, let P be the statement Camilla will take chemistry, and Q is the statement Camilla will take French. And let's write these following statements in symbolic form. Okay, the first one says Camilla will take chemistry or Camilla will take French. So these are both, there's no negations going on here. They're both the exact statements. So the way we're going to write this, we see the word or, we know it's a disjunction. So it's going to be she will take chemistry P or she will take French. Okay, so as simple as that for the first one. So let's see the next one here. Camilla will not take chemistry. So we see a negation. Or we see the disjunction, Camilla will not take French. Okay, so we see that we have two negations and the disjunction. So it's going to be she will not take chemistry. So the negation of P, disjunction, and not take French. So that's going to be the negation on Q as well. Okay, and then the last one here. We have Camilla will take French or, so disjunction obviously, Camilla will not, negation, take chemistry. So we have to be a little bit careful because the order is changed. So the order is changed. Instead of P first, now it's Q first because it's French before chemistry. So the way that we're going to write this is going to be she will take French, so Q, or she will not take chemistry. So Q or not P. Okay, so let's get into ones that get a little bit harder here. So when a compound statement contains one, or more than one, I should say, more than one connective, a comma is going to be used to indicate which simple statements are going to be grouped together. So when we're writing these compound statements with more than one connectives symbolically, what we have to remember here is the simple statements on the same side of the comma are going to be grouped together within parentheses. So we're going to have two statements and then a comma and then another statement. The two statements on the same side of the comma are going to be grouped together in parentheses. Okay, so let's see an example here. Write the following statements in symbolic form. The first one is Pink is a singer or Jennifer Aniston is an actress and Dallas is in Texas. So we have three statements here. So instead of squeezing and rewriting all these statements, I'm just going to write what they're going to represent above. Let's let Pink is a singer be statement P. Jennifer Aniston is an actress. We're going to let that be statement Q. And Dallas is in Texas. That's going to be statement R. Okay, so the way we're going to group these, we probably recognize that we have some connectives here. We have or. So we have P or Q, and then we have and R. So the issue is we cannot write this like this. We can't write it as P and Q or R. We need parentheses, and we need parentheses because we see that we have the comma here. So this comma means that we're going to be grouping two of them together in parentheses. The two that we group together are on the same side of the comma, which is going to be P and Q. So this is going to be P or Q and P or Q and R. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. The next one says Pink is a singer. Once again, I'm going to let that be P. Or Jennifer Aniston is an actress. Let that be Q. And Dallas is, oops, spelled Dallas wrong. Dallas is in Texas. So let that be R again. Okay, so grouping these together, we see the word or once again. We see the word and. So P or Q and R, it seems exactly the same, except the placement of the comma matters. So that means we're going to be grouping Q and R together this time in parentheses because they're on the same side of the comma. So it's going to be P, and then it's going to be or because we have the or next. And then we have parentheses Q and are. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference between these two sentences. Completely depends where the comma is to determine how we set it up symbolically. Okay, let's do some more examples here. So we're going to have P be the statement dinner includes soup, Q is the statement dinner includes salad, and R is the statement dinner includes the vegetable of the day. And we're going to write the following statements in symbolic form. So A, we have dinner includes soup, so that's P. And we have a comma, and then we have the word and, so conjunction. So P, comma, and salad. So it's assumed that it's dinner and dinner includes salad, or dinner includes the vegetable of the day. But in English, we don't have to repeat that over and over and over again. So the salad portion is Q, and then we have the word or, and then we have vegetable of the day, which is R. So the ones that are going to be getting grouped together are Q and R because they're on the same side of the comma. So this is going to be P, statement P, and parentheses Q or R. Okay, so for the next one, we have dinner includes soup and salad, or the vegetable of the day. So dinner includes soup, that's statement P once again, and then we have and then we have salad, which is Q. Here's the comma, and then we have or, and then vegetable of the day is R. Okay, so we have all the important things labeled. This time, P and Q are going to be grouped together because they're on the same side of the comma. So it's going to be P and Q, or R. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too bad. So one thing we have to watch out for is what I wrote right here. What we mentioned earlier is the negation symbol has the effect of negating only the statement that it's directly following it, that it's directly on, that it's in front of. So if we're negating a compound statement, so a whole compound statement, we have to use parentheses. So for example, if we have the negation of P or Q, the way that we actually read this is it is not true that, and then we say whatever P or Q is, or we can also say it is false that, and then say whatever P or Q is. Okay, so that is something to look out for, which we'll see in a second. Okay, let's do another example. We have statement P is the house is for sale, and statement Q is we can afford to buy the house. So let's write the following symbolic statements in words this time, so we're going the opposite direction. So we have the first one here. We have statement P, and then we have the and symbol, and then the negation symbol on Q. So first we're just going to write statement P out. So the house is for sale. The house is for sale, and then we have the disjunction symbol for, the conjunction symbol for and. So the house is for sale and then the negation of Q. So statement Q is we can afford to buy the house. So the negation of that is we cannot afford to buy the house. Okay, so that is the first one here. The next one, we have the negation symbol on P, and then we have the disjunction symbol or, and then the negation of Q. So let's do the negation of P first. So as you can see, we're just kind of doing one at a time here. The negation of P is going to be the house is not for sale. And then we have the disjunction symbol for or. And then we have the negation of Q, which once again we just did, is or we cannot afford to buy the house. Or we cannot afford to buy the house. So we could, instead of saying house twice, we could just kind of let our natural English language take over and just say it, to refer to the house as it, since we already mentioned house, but you'll never be wrong if you just say it again. Okay, and the last one we have the negation of, let me get rid of this little underline. We have the negation of the statement P and Q. So this is what we mentioned before. So we're going to say it is false that, and then we're just going to say the statement for P and Q. So we start with that negation out front, since it's in front of parentheses. It is false that, and now it's just going to be P and Q. And P is the house is for sale, so it is false that the house is for sale. And this is a conjunction, so we have and. It is false that the house is for sale, and we can afford to buy the house. Okay, so that's a couple more examples for us, just getting a little bit harder, a little bit at a time. So occasionally we're going to come across a neither nor statement, such as John is neither handsome nor rich. This statement means that John is not handsome and John is not rich. So this is a conjunction. So the way that we can write this is if statement P is John is handsome and statement Q is John is rich, then we can write it as the negation of P with the conjunction symbol and the negation of Q. So if you see that one, instead of reading it as John is not handsome and John is not rich, you can read it as John is neither handsome nor rich. So for the next thing, we have if-then statements. So if-then statements are going to be called conditional, and it's going to be symbolized with an arrow, and we're going to read this if-then. So for example, if we have the statement P and then the conditional Q, we read this if P, then Q. So this is going to consist of two parts. The first part before the arrow is going to be called the antecedent, so ante meaning before, and then the part after the arrow is going to be the consequent. So let's see an example. So we have the statement P, which is the portrait is a pastel. Statement Q is the portrait is by Beth Anderson. So let's write the following statements symbolically. So the first one is, if the portrait is a pastel, then the portrait is by Beth Anderson. So first we recognize that we have statement P first, and then statement Q is second. And then we recognize it is a conditional because it is if P, then Q. So this is going to be written as P, the conditional arrow, Q. So if P, then Q. Okay, for the next one we have if the portrait is by Beth Anderson, then the portrait is not a pastel. So for this one, first thing we realize is that it's a conditional. We have if then. Second thing is that we have the opposite order. So Q, statement Q is actually first. And then for the second part, statement P is negated. So it's going to be the negation of P for the second statement. So the way that we're going to write this is going to be Q, and then the conditional, and then the negation of P. Okay, and then the last one here we have it is false that if the portrait is by Beth Anderson, then the portrait is a pastel. So what we should automatically see is the first little phrase that it is false. So we should know that it's going to be starting with a negation and then parentheses. Every time we see something that starts with it is false, it's a negation, and then we're going to have parentheses and then have a compound statement inside the parentheses. So the compound statement inside here, we have an if, and then we have if, and then we have statement Q, and then we have then statement P. So there's no negations, it's just if Q, then P. So we're going to write that as Q with the conditional P. So we have the negation of the conditional Q to P. Okay, let's do another example here, make it a little bit more difficult with three statements. So let's have statement P be Rob is enrolled in calculus, statement Q is Rob's major is criminal justice, and statement R is Rob's major is engineering. So let's write the following symbolic statements in words, and let's indicate whether this statement is a negation, conjunction, disjunction, or conditional. So even though many of these statements are going to have a conditional and a disjunction, or a conditional and a conjunction, it's only going to be one of them. So we'll see in this first example in a second what I mean by that. So the first one, we have Q, and then conditional, the negation of P, and then we have the disjunction statement R. So when we have the parentheses like this, we should know there's going to be a comma. So let's take care of the statement in parentheses first, and then we'll worry about the part after that once we're done. So it's a conditional, so we're going to start with if. So it's going to be if P, then not Q. So we're going to start it as if Rob's major is criminal justice, then not P. So the negation of statement P is going to be Rob is not enrolled in calculus. So if Rob's major is criminal justice, then Rob is not enrolled in calculus. So that's what was in parentheses. So now we have to throw in a comma after this. So remember, we throw in the comma because that was in parentheses. And now we finish it up with this disjunction. We have or statement R. So that means or Rob's major is engineering. Okay, so that's the total statement here. So trying to figure out if this is a negation, conjunction, disjunction, or conditional, we have to look at essentially what is being done outside the parentheses. So the thing outside of the parentheses is going to be this disjunction. So since the disjunction is outside of the parentheses, this whole statement as a whole is a disjunction. Even though there's a conditional and a negation in there, it is whatever is outside the parentheses. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. We have Q, and then we have the conditional, and then in parentheses we have the negation of P with the disjunction for with R. So let's go ahead and take care of this Q first, starting with Q. So it's a conditional, so we're starting with if. So it's going to be if Q, then. So Q was the statement Rob's major is criminal justice. So if Rob's major is criminal justice, so then we have to notice that everything after that is in parentheses, so we need a comma. So if Rob's major is in criminal justice, comma, then, so it's going to be a disjunction starting with the negation of P. So the negation of P would be Rob is not enrolled in calculus. So that's going to be if Rob's major is criminal justice, then Rob is not enrolled in calculus. And it's a disjunction, so we have the word or coming next. So then Rob is not enrolled in calculus, or statement R. Statement R is Rob's major is engineering. So or Rob's major is engineering. And now trying to determine what kind of compound statement this is. It's going to be the statement. It's going to be the symbol outside of the parentheses, which is going to be the conditional. It's going to be the arrow. So this is a conditional statement. So even though it was a disjunction inside the parentheses, we don't care about that. We care what was outside, which was a conditional. Okay, so on to the last, one of the last things we'll be doing is going to be the if and only if statements. So this is called the biconditional. So notice that it's almost the same thing as conditional, except with the prefix by in front of it. So by meaning to. So this is going to be symbolized with a double-headed arrow, and it's going to be read if and only if. And we can also abbreviate it as IFF, that represents if and only if. So what this actually means, which should make sense based on the word biconditional, is that if we have the conditional statement P if and only if Q, this means that P conditional Q and Q conditional P. So if we have the statement P if and only if Q, that means P implies Q and Q implies P. So one cannot exist without the other, essentially. Okay, so let's see an example here. So we have statement P is Alex plays goalie on a lacrosse team. Statement Q is the Huskies win the Champions Cup. So let's write the following symbolic statements in words. The first one is P, and then we have the biconditional Q. So P if and only if Q. So it's going to be statement P, which is Alex plays goalie on a lacrosse team. And we have the biconditional, so that's if and only if. So you can write IFF if you want. So Alex plays goalie on a lacrosse team if and only if statement Q. So that means if and only if the Huskies win the Champions Cup. Okay, and then for the next one here we have Q if and only if not P. So first let's start by writing statement Q. Statement Q is the Huskies win the Champions Cup. And now it's going to be if and only if. So if and only if. I'm going to write this with the IFF just so we remember that we can do that. The Huskies win the Champions Cup if and only if not P. So it's if and only if Alex does not play goalie on the lacrosse team. Okay, and then the last one here we have a negation out front, and then we have a compound statement inside parentheses. So automatically seeing this negation out front, we know that we have to start by it is false. It's negating the whole entire thing in parentheses, the whole entire compound statement in parentheses. So we have to say it is false that, and now we can just say exactly what's inside those parentheses. So it is a biconditional, so it is false that statement P if and only if statement not Q. So statement P was Alex plays goalie. So it is false that Alex plays goalie on a lacrosse team if and only if. So once again, I'm going to use IFF for an abbreviation. It is false that Alex plays goalie on the lacrosse team if and only if the negation of statement Q. So the negation of statement Q is going to be that the Huskies do not win the Champions Cup. So if and only if the Huskies do not win the Champions Cup. Okay, so that is the examples for the biconditional. So for this last thing is just a little summary of the connectives that we discussed in this section. So we have the column for the formal name over here on the left. We have negation, conjunction, disjunction, conditional, biconditional. We have their corresponding symbols right next to them. We have how we read them out in English, and then we have an example of using them in symbolic form. Okay, so definitely take advantage of this table right here and make sure you have all of those memorized. Okay, so that is it for this section.